So Madison Smyth is one of those people, or Madison Allen as she used to be known, who's sprung up on the edge of a crime story, I suppose. But unfortunately for her now, she's got herself in the centre of an actual crime situation at the very least.
Yeah, so Madison Allen is the girlfriend, now wife, of Johnny Smyth. He is one of the suspects in the murder of 37-year-old John George. So John George last December went over on holiday to Spain. He was meeting a guy called Johnny Smyth, who he had been friends with while he was there. Whatever happened while he was there was obviously a breakdown in that. He gets murdered. His family obviously flew over. They were looking for him at the start. They just thought he had gone missing in Spain. I flew over, I think it was about the 27th of December, 28th. And at that stage, the day I arrived, we arrived at the apartment where Madison Allen and Johnny Smyth had been living, where John George was last seen. There was two young fellas who they'd left behind. They'd already gone on the run. They'd legged it. But they'd left two young fellas behind who looked like death warmed up, despite the fact that they were living in lovely, lovely sunny Spain. They were like two ghosts. And the police started closing that off the crime scene. So it became quite obvious then that the Spanish police, the Guardia Civil, were aware that this guy, some harm had came to him. He wasn't just missing. He hadn't wandered off into Benidorm or wherever they were trying to say he was. Originally, the police arrested a guy called Michael Malley, who is a guy from the Czech Republic. And they were looking for Johnny Smyth. Johnny Smyth has gone on the run. The family were getting information from relatives of Johnny Smyth. It was misinformation, saying, oh, John went here, he went there, he was last seen here and there, and they were sending him on wild goose chases all over the place. But we knew he'd gone with Madison Allen, his girlfriend, who's a considerable bit younger than him. She was about 19 at the time. I think she's 20 now. She has a very high profile on social media. She is an OnlyFans content creator and had been doing OnlyFans content with Johnny Smyth, and is very active on TikTok and Instagram and all those sort of platforms.
And kind of in the way of these modern sort of crime stories, a lot of it got played out over social media and some of it on Madison's social media in particular.
Yeah, she was posting videos on social media going, oh, I know nothing about this. And she was more concerned about her dogs than she was about anything else, because she's going, people keep saying I fled to feed my dogs. I mean, this guy had eventually, his body was found. He had been stabbed, he had been shot, he had been beaten, he had been stripped naked and threw into this sort of rural area on the road out of Alicante. The police said then that, right, this is a murder investigation, we're seeking Johnny Smyth. They had to put an international and a European arrest warrant out for him, and then a local Spanish arrest warrant as well. There was rumours he was in Thailand. Believe that he may have actually went to Thailand for a time and then entered back in again through Spain, and then eventually ended up in Portugal. It was actually John George's father, Billy George, who got an address in Portugal. He went there and watched, seen him and Madison Allen coming in and out of the place, and then contacted the Portuguese authorities, who went and acted on the arrest warrant. He was extradited to Spain, and so Johnny Smyth remains on remand in Spain, while the investigation, which the police say they have concluded, and there's only two suspects, him and Michael Malley. But in Spain, the system works very different to what I'm used to here. It's a judge-led investigation, and the charges, the courts have been in recess all summer. They're coming back now. We should hear very soon when the charges are going to be put to the two suspects and what the charges are going to be. At this stage, we believe it's joint enterprise murder. Now, Madison is on the run with Johnny Smyth. She then claims that she gets married in Gibraltar while they're on the run. I don't know how they managed to do all the legal paperwork with him being wanted by an arrest warrant, but they get married. So she's then boasting that she's getting conjugal visits with him while he is on remand.
Yeah, because it is slightly like, it is a funny system in Spain, because you only remain a person of interest, often up until the week of the trial. So you could be a person of interest for 2 to 3 years, and then the week of the trial you're charged and it begins. So you're even less of a remand prisoner in a way. So you're just a person of interest. So they do allow them a lot more leeway in prison. Now, the conjugal visits, as you said, it wouldn't happen up here or in the north.
No, it's news to me that they even had them in Spain, and you would imagine it would only be, even if it was, then it would be for sentenced long-term prisoners and not for people who are on remand. So she's boasting about this. He is obviously remanded because he's a flight risk. He's not going to get out until the judge decides what's going to happen. And as you say, in Spain, I know that the defence and the prosecution have been served with their papers. There's tens of thousands of pages of information. They've all received that, and they should I think we should probably hear quite soon. Madison's been really bolshy about this. I'm standing by my man on social media. But all the while, you can see she's living quite a flash lifestyle still, with no visible means of income, driving very flashy cars, living in very nice places, constantly posting pictures of herself with cocktails and making videos of herself. And then at the start of September, there was a rumour doing the rounds that Madison Allen had been arrested in connection with drugs. I couldn't pin it down. I did contact a guy we know, Jared Cousins, who's a journalist. He works in Spain. He had messaged me back originally and saying, well, look, the people I need to speak to aren't about. And then he came back and said that, yes, she had been arrested with quite a considerable amount of drugs. I think it was a kilo of crystal meth, which isn't something that is actually quite common here. I know it's becoming more common, but, you wouldn't hear a lot of people getting charged anywhere in this island really with crystal meth. It's an unusual. It's becoming more and more common in Europe, and we know in a lot of European countries there's large seizures of crystal meth. And she also had a considerable amount of cannabis. She was in her A5 Audi on a road, one of the main roads in Alicante, and late at night when police pulled her over, there's an unnamed English woman was in the passenger seat. The drugs were found, and obviously she was arrested. So she had been in remand in Spain for 10 days. The judge had granted her bail, and I think it took about 4 days, must have took to get the money up, because she's lodged €20,000 as a surety with the court, and she is now on bail. And as you said, had that been here, if someone's caught with drugs in their car, what usually happens is they're charged to court, and then they are either remanded or released on bail, and then they have to prefer their defence, and the prosecution prefers the case, and it goes through the court system. In Spain, the judge-led investigation, she won't be charged or not charged or whatever's going to happen to her until that is complete.
Now, she does, through the reports from Jared Cousins, there's, she's given an explanation of why she had these drugs, or that's what's been reported to us anyway.
Yeah. She said that an unnamed man had threatened her at gunpoint, that this man had been threatening her since the arrest of her husband, and that she was asked to take this bag to, I think it was to Torrevieja, she said. But so she's claiming that this was under duress. So that's what Madison Allen's defence is.
I mean, it does, I suppose, show that there is a group of people over there, both from both sides of the border and some from the UK, living in that part of Spain, and there is a lot going on, isn't there?
We always know that there was people who went there and they were involved in criminality. We know through a lot of the kind of feud stuff, a lot of that made its way over to Spain as well. I suppose what I didn't really know, and I'm not naive, I've been doing this a long time, what I didn't realise is the sort of underbelly that existed, that when I went to Spain in that December, for instance, those two young fellas that were in the house who looked like zombies, and the house was full of drug paraphernalia and all sorts of other things. And someone who was on the search knew one of them, a guy called Dad McMakin, who has since been stabbed in Spain. He's been arrested in Spain. He's constantly in trouble. And she showed me a picture of him on his Instagram when he first arrived. And he was, young, fit, tan, healthy-looking fella. And in the space of a couple of months, he was skin and bones. You could practically see through his skin. He was that white, clearly very unwell, clearly mentally struggling, full of addiction. And then the crimes that he has been arrested for become increasingly more petty and desperate, breaking into places and things like that. There's also women who were being lured there by that very glossy Instagram content that like Madison Allen was putting up, that, this is a great life, and they were getting lured over there and thinking that this was the glamorous life that they were going to live. And it is not anything like that. It may be for a very small fraction at the top end of that pyramid, but for the people on further down, it's almost like, I think they're almost like pimps, if you know what I mean. They're showing you these pictures of this beautiful, look at me, and flying around on motorbikes and jet skis and all of that. And the reality is you're going to be a drug runner, taking all the risks for very little gain. And clearly the people who are involved in that sort of drug running end of it are also very, very much addicted to the drugs that they're selling, and therefore completely beholden to whoever it is they're working for in order just to function day to day. And
there's increasing levels of violence over there. We've seen from people associated with John Gilligan and people like that, that there's been...
And the Spanish authorities take a really, really dim view of it. And, I remember going and speaking, there was one of the people who you'd met along the way. I'm talking to a guy in a cafe, and he had that sort of English old school gangstery look about him, like someone who's maybe been there from the 90s. And I told him what I was over there doing, and he had said, in the main, the Spanish authorities, especially those sort of bigger criminals, there's not a blind eye turn to it, but there's a sort of, you don't annoy us, you don't get in our way, you're not involved in crimes such as shooting and stabbing and killing people. And there was a sort of understanding almost for many years. And then when the like of Johnny Smyth comes along and they're making a lot of noise, he's posing with pictures with guns in his hand on his Facebook and stuff. And the other criminals didn't like it because he's all of a sudden bringing a lot of negative attention towards them from the Spanish police. I mean, I spoke to a neighbour of that apartment, and it was a lovely apartment, and it had all the trappings outside. It had the Harley motorcycle outside. It had the jet ski parked in the garden. It had the pool, all of that. But the neighbour said since they have moved in there, and he said Johnny Smyth isn't as, he's covered in tattoos. He's not exactly someone who's going to fade into the background. And she said, it's the girl with the dark hair and the guy covered in tattoos. The police have never been away from that place. They're there constantly. And there was parties and there was fights and there was chaos going on constantly. And the night when John George disappeared, the neighbours were able to say to me, he disappeared. The night he disappeared, there's a lot of coming and going. The cameras of the police went around and took all the neighbours' cameras, a lot of coming and going out of the apartment. There had been Christmas lights put up outside it. And I think it was one of the wee elderly neighbours said, I could tell you the date, I think she said it was on the 19th or 20th of December. Those lights went off and they've never came back on again. And that was when, obviously, they decided to leg it before things got any hotter and heavier that were what were going on. So it was a very strange, I suppose, reality for me to see that not just the amount of people from here, from Northern Ireland, the amount of people who were flying over there thinking this is a get-rich-quick scheme and I'm going to be living in the sun and drinking cocktails and having a great time, and the booze is flowing, the drugs are flowing, everything's great. And it was far from that. It might have been, Johnny Smyth and Madison might have been living it up, but everybody else around them looked like their lives were spiralling into chaos.
And of course, there's very little safety net over there in terms of social welfare and housing and things like that you might take for granted.
No, and there's no family support and there's no nothing. And, while the Georges were out looking for John George and they had T-shirts for name, they were telling me that a woman had stopped them and said that her brother had been murdered and he had actually been dismembered and they never found his entire body, and she was someone from Ireland, and that had happened decades before. So this isn't anything new. As you said, people have been using that part of Spain for a long time to go on the run, but I don't know. So I think that you always say don't believe what you see on social media, and that was the case. There's a facade that what they'd like you to believe their lives are like, and then there's a reality of what their lives are going to be like. And I was looking it up, and crystal meth in Spain, that amount of crystal meth, should you be convicted, you could be looking at 10 years in prison, and for a very young woman, that's a large chunk of their sort of formidable younger years to be spent behind bars.
It really is, and it is taken seriously. The harder the Class A drugs are taken much more seriously.
Yeah.
Now, it continued to go on, like after the murder of John George and even after the arrests, there's been, it was an unusual amount of social media activity, wasn't there? And is that continuing to go on, and are people still...
Well, yeah, there was. I mean, there's a lot of tuning for one, and there's a lot of people on either. So I know when I would upload anything to social media about the John George situation, you get a load of comments, most of them in support of the family, but a lot of them then in support of Johnny Smyth and what was going on there. There's another issue that's playing out here, in that there was a phone which is believed to belong to Johnny Smyth that was in the hands of an English sort of cyber criminal who had contacted somebody linked to the George family to say that he'd been handed this phone to wipe it. And we know that, most people probably think, well, if you don't want your phone, throw it in a river. But the digital footprint of that phone exists, whether that phone exists or not. We have people going through the courts on the EncroChat charges. The EncroChat handsets were never seized. The data exists. So the data and the GPS and how many masts that phone might have pinged against and all of that all remains and is able for the Spanish authorities to gain access to. They claimed that they were asked to wipe all of that and to make all of that go away, and they could do that for a fee. They were never paid, and so therefore they took the hump, and then the phone was picked up and it was given to the PSNI here. The family believed that phone would show that the suspects in the John George murder were being assisted by somebody in Northern Ireland, both financially and in terms of logistics and hiring cars and all sorts of other things to make sure they weren't apprehended. So the PSNI have been asked to investigate that. I don't think the family solicitor is too happy with how that's being approached at the minute, and so there may be an update on that sometime later this month. We know that there's a meeting arranged between the family solicitors and the police and the PPS, and hopefully after that we'll maybe get an update as to what's happening with that.
Well, no doubt we'll come back to it then, and no doubt young Madison will continue to update us on our social media anyway in the meantime.
She was very angry on social media, and she kept calling me an old woman, and the only I am actually an old woman, Madison. Compared to her, I'm a very freaking old woman. But it did strike me as really sad, because she thinks that's the worst thing you can say to someone, because her whole identity is wrapped up in what she looks like. Being sexually objectified by men is what her whole identity is. So she thinks to say that to someone is the worst thing you can say. Whereas we know, as people of a certain age, there's no greater privilege than being happy and healthy and existing and still alive and putting one foot in front of the other.
Mere survival is an achievement.
But it struck me that in her little narrow world that she lives in, she thinks to get old must be the worst thing that could possibly happen to you.
There's many soldiers that who fail to get old, and that's a worse outcome for sure. Okay, thanks, Alison.